Hi, you guys. Welcome. My name is Emma. I am a mom of identical twin boys who are almost 3 years old. I'm a Montessori trained guide, and I've shared a lot on my channel about how we are bringing the Montessori philosophy into our home in really practical, meaningful, beautiful ways throughout daily life. But I have never sat down and told you the story of how I found Montessori and how this method and this philosophy and this way of educating children, but even more, I'm seeing this way of living life in a Montessori way, how it's changed me and shaped who I am, and really been a blessing to me, to my children, to my family at large. And so today I want to tell you that story. Ever since I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I would spend my days at home playing school. We would get out of school, and the next day I would take all of our school supplies and I would turn my bedroom into my classroom, and I would teach my little sister. And I remember my dad coming upstairs being like, "Emma, you just got out of school, take a break." But it was so exciting, all of the folders and the notebooks and the pencils and the scissors. I just loved it. And school supply shopping was probably one of my favorite things to do in the summer, I was that kid. And so I always had wanted to be a teacher. As I went through high school, I knew this. I wanted to be a teacher. So I went to a charter school from K through 12th grade. And we had an opportunity in our later years to take classes at the community college for college credit. And so I did this, and I intentionally took classes that would apply to my undergrad teaching degree. I went to a state university, and so I looked at that program. I knew it was a good teaching program, and I just figured out what all my prerequisites were, took those in high school, graduated high school with my associate's degree, and then transferred right into the education program at a state university. It was in my senior year of high school while I was taking a sociology class at the community college, and we had an assignment where we had to look at something within society and kind of compare different models of it. And so I chose to look at education, and so I went and I visited my elementary school, and I looked at a charter school. I went and I visited a Montessori school, and I think I went to just a public school as well. And so I toured and observed in all of these classrooms. I had kind of known about Montessori because my younger brother had been going to take Catechesis of the Good Shepherd classes, which is the religious component of Montessori, or teaching religion in a Montessori way. So I had known this existed, but I had never been in a Montessori classroom. And so this was actually a classroom of one of my mom's friends, is a Montessori teacher, and she's still a dear friend to me and mentor to me during my time as a teacher, but even now as a mother. And so I went and observed in this Montessori school just in high school, and I spent my morning there. And I remember the moment when the whole room became silent, and all of the children had their eyes and their attention on the guide, the teacher. And I didn't even know how this happened, but there was a bell that was rung very quietly, and this hush silence fell on the classroom. And then the children transitioned, and everybody was working and doing their own things, and it was all these things were happening, but no one was directing it. There was no one standing up at the front of the class saying now take out your math notebooks and now take out your pencils and do this. It just flowed beautifully. And you wondered how is something like this possible? How are all of these children moving and functioning and knowing what to do without anybody standing in front telling them? And so it was in that moment when the whole class came silent and it all stopped that I was this is it. I remember getting in my car after I did my observation and I called my mom and I was like, this is it. I am going to be a Montessori teacher. And so I didn't know exactly where to start. I kind of started looking up Montessori trainings, and I just knew like, well, I probably need to have a college degree. So I continued forward with my path in getting my teaching degree in elementary education, went to school, and while I started that program, then I got some more information about Montessori teacher training, and I applied, and I wasn't really sure that I would get in because a prerequisite for the Montessori training was to have a bachelor's degree, and I had an associate's degree, and I had just started my undergrad program. So I was a little skeptical, but I got accepted on like a probationary enrollment just because I didn't have all of the prerequisites to get in. But they accepted me anyways, and I started training that first summer after I started college. I had just turned 19 years old. I was the youngest one in my Montessori training, and I had no idea what I was starting or what I was embarking on. I had heard different things of what Montessori training was about, but I didn't know what this journey was going to be, and it changed my life. It was 3 years of intensive training. It was through the summer, so I was only in training for 3 summers. And during the academic year, I was in college, and then I started teaching in the classroom. That experience of Montessori training really changed me because it was like going to an immersion school of learning a new language, right? I was just like dropped into this perfectly authentic Montessori environment that was perfectly prepared, that I was being trained by excellent trainers who knew the philosophy and were going to, present it to you in a very authentic way. I was trained as an AMI Montessori guide, so Association Montessori International. There's a lot of different trainings. I actually have a whole video on like what is Montessori teacher training if you're kind of interested in it, if you're not sure if it's the right step for you. I'll link that here in the cards as well as down in the description box below for you to check out if you're kind of considering Montessori training. And I'm so grateful that I did that training, but it was one of the hardest things that I have done in my life and one of the most intensive and rigorous programs that I have ever been through. But it really was foundational for this understanding of the Montessori philosophy that I have. However, I don't think it's necessary if you don't intend to be teaching in a classroom. I think there's a lot of other ways to get the information and to understand the philosophy and adopt these principles in your own life without going to Montessori teacher training. So I don't think it's for everyone. So watch that video if you are interested in learning more about it. I was going through training, and then I started teaching in the classroom, setting up my environment, and just transforming myself into a prepared adult. I had a video just recently, I'll link it in the cards, all about this work of becoming a prepared adult, where we're encouraged by Dr. Montessori to rid ourselves of pride and vanity and to just remove obstacles from our own life that are in turn obstacles to the children that we are taking care of. When I look back now and I think, how has Montessori changed who I am? What elements of the Montessori training and my time in the classroom have really affected who I am now as a wife and a mother and a homemaker? These are the things that I can see that have been changed and influenced by the Montessori philosophy. So one is really the way that I have chosen to set up our home for our children. So like I said in the beginning, I have 3-year-old twin toddlers. And so things are prepared for them. There are small pieces of furniture in our home that are for them, small chairs, small tables, low hooks, dishes that are low. And this is intentional so that they can be independent. I think that's one thing when you are in a Montessori environment, you see that it is specifically prepared for the size and the development of that age child. And so that element has been brought into my home. And not perfectly, and there's like places and spaces in my house that I can't physically make tiny, like the toilet or our kitchen sink. I'm not going to make a tiny little sink. to install a small toilet, but I'm going to put a step stool in there or have a learning tower where they can climb up higher to be able to be involved in those areas in our home in an independent way. So things like that, adding a step stool, having a learning tower, getting them involved and giving them the opportunity to be independent is something that we are bringing into our home. I have a ton of videos. I have a whole playlist of Montessori at home. I will link it down in the description box below for you to just watch more of what does this look like? What does Montessori at home look like? And I'm just one example of what it looks like. It is more than just your prepared environment. And that kind of leads me into the next thing, is Montessori has really given me an appreciation and an understanding of the child. That children, actually all human beings, we have these tendencies, we have these things that guide us forward in our life. And at different stages of development, there are going to be different things happening. There's going to be different characteristics emerging. And so right now, my children are 3, and at this stage, they are in sensitive periods, which is just like a time where they're it's a sensitive period, a time where they're very attuned or open to absorbent of certain things. And so they're in a sensitive period for order. So that's why having a prepared environment where things have a place is really important, because they have this sensitivity to things being in order. And I can see how when I have things orderly and they know where things are, they are able to function so much better in the environment. They're able to be more independent, and it just works smoothly because that characteristic of theirs is being met by the environment, if that makes sense. Another one is a sensitive period for language, right? So they're absorbing all of the language around them. So I want to use really clear, concise language. One of the first books of Dr. Montessori's that I read was The Absorbent Mind. And this is a dense book. So if you like reading, give it a try. I'll put a link to it down below. But in this book, she's really articulating who the young child is, the child from 0 to 6. What is happening in their minds? Who is this person? And one thing she names, and kind of a term she uses, is that a child at this age has an absorbent mind. They're like a sponge and they just soak up everything. And this absorbency of their mind is effortless. You know, they're not intentionally absorbing what's around them. It just happens. And so they will absorb the good and the bad. It's a beautiful thing, but also we have to be careful because they're going to take it all in. She kind of gives the example of a camera, right? Like a camera versus drawing. You could take a picture of like a ball or of the landscape, and those two impressions are just as easy for the camera to capture. That is kind of like the child's mind. Things just are absorbed without them trying to absorb them. They're going to take them in. And so that is why having an environment that is prepared to meet their need, that is orderly, that meets these sensitivities that they have and these characteristics is so important. And those are the types of things I have been learning and just like that have been merged into who I am because I was exposed to these Montessori ideas. And a lot of them aren't even just like Montessori's ideas. They are ideas that are held to be true by a lot of different child psychologists. I think how we have come to understand the child is pretty consistent, yet a lot of our approaches seem to do kind of the opposite of what we know would be good for them, because it's kind of hard sometimes. You know, it's hard to let our children do things for themselves and to have these hands-on experiences because we could do it much faster. And that's the other part that was really transformed in me was me, who I am as a person. I think you could set up the most beautiful Montessori environment and you could have a child who's eager and willing and, you know, developmentally prepared to engage in that environment. But if you don't have an adult who's prepared to guide the child through all of these activities and through all of these moments of their life, it won't matter. It won't matter that you have a beautiful wooden stacking activity on your shelf. It's not going to matter that you have bean pouring out and available to them if you don't know how to like guide them to this and how to kind of communicate and interact with them. When I look at Montessori's idea for life, we get to control ourselves and we get to control our environment, and we can't control our child, right? But we can navigate all that life has. In a lot of ways, we can, I don't like the word manipulate, but we can kind of use ourselves and our ability to guide and our environment to direct behavior and actions in the way that we want to see. Shaping and developing all of these areas is so important, because when we better understand the child and their needs and their tendencies and what their interests are, and again, when I look at interests, it's not necessarily like they like dinosaurs or they like this color. It's like, what are their genuine developmental needs? You know, we have gross motor needs and fine motor needs and communication needs and just all the different facets of someone's life. But Dr. Montessori recognized that children have this deep need to work, for purposeful work. And it is through work, it is through purposeful movements of the hand that a child constructs themselves as a human being. And so when you know this about the child, when you know that, okay, my child needs purposeful work, they need things to engage them, that engage all of their senses, that engage them, you know, big things and small things, fine motor things and gross motor things. All of those things are really, really good for the child. And I think somewhere along the line, our society has looked at that word work and made it a really negative thing and thought, well, work's bad. You know, work, I just want to get done with my work so that I can play. And this is a misconception, I think, in Montessori a lot, is that Montessori kids don't play. And that's not true, but sometimes their play looks like work. Sometimes the adult could maybe be like, oh, I'm not going to burden them. I don't want them to have to like do chores. But you know what? It's meeting like an inner need in them that's so great that they love to do it. Like if I give my toddlers a spray bottle and a squeegee and a washcloth and they can wash my windows, they're like way happier than a basket of cars. Like they love that. They love this purposeful work. This is where then when you understand that about the child, then you can prepare your home with these types of things in mind. And then you as the adult can kind of guide them to these activities that bring more purpose and meaning to their life, developing a variety of skills. And it puts that ownership of who is doing the self-construction. Like we can't learn things for our child. We've already done that, right? When I was a teacher, this became really clear. It was like, I could be really good at addition and subtraction and multiplication and division. And that doesn't matter if my students couldn't do those things. Like they had to have the repetition and the experiences and working with their hands to learn those concepts. They are not just a vessel for me to like pour my knowledge into. Here I am telling you this, but really for you to start to see it is to do your own work, to understand what are the needs of your child, what types of activities can I bring into my home to meet those needs. And it's not that you even have to go buy anything, just what things in your daily life bring you meaning and joy and purpose and are productive for you. How can you involve your child in those tasks as well? And you'll probably see that that brings them more meaning and belonging and connection to you and your home. All of that to say, Montessori has transcended into so many areas of my life because I'm thinking about these things, and it all kind of like goes around in circles, right? Like I'm thinking about, okay, what am I doing that is either helping or being a hindrance to my child? And I'm working on those things, right? When I'm not prepared, then that affects them. I'm looking at my environment. I'm looking at the physical space, how it is supporting them. And I'm also just looking and understanding my child and how they're changing as they move through different stages. If you're a parent of like a 6, 7, 8-year-old, you might notice that they went through like a huge shift from when they were that 3 to 6-year-old to that like 6 to 9-year-old. That's because they changed a plane of development. They basically became like a whole new child with a whole new set of characteristics. And so then our approach changes. The way that we communicate with them changes. The way that we offer them choices is going to change because they have these different tendencies and characteristics guiding them. I have a whole blog post on the 4 planes of development, which if that's a Montessori idea you're not yet familiar with, I encourage you to check that out. I'll put it down in the description box below. It can just be really helpful and comforting knowing these things, because then you can recognize them when you see them, and we can have a little more empathy or a little less frustration. Like when I understood that my children have this really big need to explore, then when I see that happening, even if they're exploring things they shouldn't be, I am at least a little more understanding of like, okay, you have this big need. How do I redirect this to something that's more appropriate, something that you can explore, rather than just blaming them for being naughty? Because actually that exploration is really good, right? And it was misguided, probably because I left something out or my environment wasn't prepared well enough to meet that need of exploration. And so that comes back to me as the adult of like, okay, I wasn't prepared. My environment wasn't prepared to meet these needs. And so we are never going to do this perfectly. I know I get passionate about it because I love Montessori, and I think it all makes sense when you put these 3 things together. And there's going to be challenges with all of them, right? Our space might have limitations. We might not be able to offer things the way we want because of the space we have available, okay? We can work with that. You're gonna have to make adjustments, and that's okay, right? You might have limitations. There's times where I'm sick, or I'm not feeling well, or I have things that I have to get done, and there's accommodations and there's adjustments. It's not all perfect, pretty all the time, but being grounded in these principles and this understanding of the way the child, the environment, and myself, the prepared adult, kind of work together has really shaped me as a mother. That is a little bit of my Montessori journey. It's fun to look back and see how in the last decade of applying these principles and coming to understand them and working with different age children and having my own children, how I've seen this change and develop. And I just want to encourage you that if you are looking to implement or start applying Montessori principles in your home, that you do so ever gently. And I just want to remind you that it's not about what it all looks like. It's not just about having pretty materials or things perfectly prepared. It goes way deeper than that. There's greater meaning and purpose behind putting out materials like that when you understand why are they on your shelf? Why is that available? Putting a tray of bean pouring out for your toddler, if you don't understand the purpose of why you're doing that, isn't going to be very helpful for your environment or for you, because then it's probably going to get misused and you're going to want to pull your hair out because they're pouring beans everywhere. You can guide them and direct them when you know that like this is purposeful movement for your hands, and you can redirect them to use it appropriately. You're going to be using your skill of observation. That sounds really formal, but literally just like watching and noticing what your child does or is interested in, or maybe is like a little clumsy with, to work more on. That's all little bits of information to guide you in guiding your child on this path. Well, you guys, thanks for bearing with me if you're still here watching. As you can tell, I love Montessori. I think it's really beautiful. I want it to feel manageable, attainable, and know that there's no place you need to be at to start. You just get to start. You get to start small. Start with yourself. Start with your environment. Understand the needs of your child. Montessori really, it's funny. It's like it's about the child, but it's kind of not about the child, right? Like you can't control your child. And so you can work on improving yourself, the way that you prepare your environment, the way that you communicate to your child, the way that you offer choices, and how you understand your child's needs to guide them, because they're going to do what they're going to do. And so it's kind of like, it's an art almost. You won't see in Montessori environments teachers standing at the front of the class like teaching all of the kids at once. Like there's this beautiful invitation to work, and I would go to students and I would say like, I have something that I want to show you. Would you come here? And you're inviting them into something really beautiful. And I see this in my home as well, that when I make an invitation to my children into something that I am doing or something in our environment, whether it's pouring or a puzzle or a game, to really direct them, guide them based on those needs that we know that they have. And I think that's really what Montessori is all about, is just understanding the child, understanding how we can guide them to better meet those needs that they have, and how we can prepare our environment to support those needs, but also then support us as the adult who's, trying to create good habits and routines and, raise a strong, confident, capable human being. That's why I prepare my home in this way, right? I put a low hook in our entryway so that they can learn to hang their coat up and be responsible for something that is theirs. It gives some really clear boundaries and expectations of like, what is the child's? What is mine? What is my role? What is their role? You're the bridge to that, right? You are the guide, kind of directing them towards those things that they can be independent with. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, thoughts. Leave them down in the comment section below. All right, you guys, well, that is it for today's video. I'm sure I rambled on long enough. I will see you next week for another video. Have a great day. Bye.